Hello, and welcome to Booked on Shalom World TV, where we introduce Christian books. I'm your host, Clare Hinshaw. Today we are speaking with Patti Maguire Armstrong, the author of Holy Hacks: Everyday Ways to Live Your Faith and Get to Heaven. Patti is an award-winning Catholic journalist and award-winning and best-selling author who is a correspondent for Our Sunday Visitor and the National Catholic Register and a contributing writer for Legatus. She also works in marketing for Teresa Tomeo Communications. Patti's books include the Amazing Grace series, Big Hearted, and Dear God, You Can't Be Serious. She has appeared on EWTN, Catholic TV, Fox and Friends, and numerous local and national radio programs, and hosts the talk show Ladies of Another View. Her work has also appeared at CatholicMom.com, Epic Pew, Catholic Lane, Integrated Catholic Life, and Catholic Exchange. Patti earned a bachelor's degree in social work from Michigan State University and a master's degree in public administration from Portland State University. She and her husband Mark met in the Peace Corps in the Marshall Islands, Micronesia. They now live in North Dakota, where they raised their 10 children. Patti, welcome to Booked.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on today, Claire.
Well, I'd love to start off with just a very basic question about the book. Your title is Holy Hacks, and I'm wondering how you define a holy hack. What do you mean by that?
Well, the idea came to me because life hacks have become so popular, and hacks are easy, quick, clever ways to get things done. And the name Holy Hacks came to me one day, just kind of out of the blue. And I thought, oh, I love that name. I bet somebody's already used it before. And I did a search and there was nothing. And I thought, well, my idea of a holy hack is thinking of ways to live your life as you go through your days to grow closer and increase your capacity in living a life with God at the center. And there's so many ways to do that. And my mind just kind of goes there of always thinking, oh, hey, I could do this. For instance, I'll give you an example so that'll really make it obvious what I'm talking about. For instance, somebody gave me a plant once on my birthday. And every time I watered that plant, I thought I should pray for the person that gave it to me. And so there's so many little things you can do. I'm going to water the plant anyways, but now I'm blessing somebody and thanking them for that gift. Or in traffic, if somebody cuts you off, we need to remember that Jesus told us to love one another, and the measure with which you measure will be measured back to you. So I stop and think to pray for that person instead of getting angry. And in that way, I've blessed both of us. So the whole idea of holy hacks is not necessarily turning your life upside down, but moment by moment, living closer to God.
I know, I love that. And I feel like that really plays into a whole tradition in the church. We think specifically of St. Therese and Mother Teresa doing small things with great love. And one thing I really appreciated about the way that you organized the book was you focused in on each chapter on a different element of the spiritual life and specific hacks for that particular thing. How did you decide what topics to focus in on?
I looked at the virtues of the church, the virtues of a Christian life, the things we need to avoid. For instance, I did a whole chapter on gossip because I think with human nature, that's something that we often slip into, but it's so hazardous to our soul. So I did a chapter on humility. Mother Teresa was big on humility and was such a shining example of that. And I looked at what are the ways, look at the lives of the saints, and what are the ways that they increased in holiness. And then I also looked at just day by day, what are we doing? How are we going about our life? There's a chapter on relationships. There's one on spiritual warfare. So once I started sitting down and brainstorming, looking at virtues, pitfalls, and the saints, I came up with my chapters.
Well, following up on that last question, I noticed that for each chapter, you started off before getting into the actual hacks, giving kind of an explanation of the virtue or the element of the spiritual life that you were addressing. Why did you think it was important to provide that explanation to your readers?
For a lot of different reasons. I didn't want to assume that we're all on the same page. And then I also want to get us in the same space before we jump into the hacks. So, for instance, with relationships, we talk about they can be difficult and yet they're important, whether it's a marriage relationship, people we work with, friends, neighbors, that there's ways that we have to live out our Christian faith. Now, with humility, I really wanted people to understand what is humility. For instance, a lot of people think if you put yourself down, you're being humble. And that's actually the opposite of humility because you're still being self-focused. And that humble people, I use the example of Mother Teresa, humble people are actually very confident because they put all their trust in God. They look at their gifts. They celebrate their gifts as being from God and not from themselves. And as Mother Teresa used to say, when you're humble, nothing can touch you. You don't worry about, you're not seeking praise, which is a lot of work, trying to be the first, the best, get everybody's attention, get complimented. That's a lot of work. When you let that go and you just look to what God is seeing and serving Him, then you don't need to worry about how other people are reacting. And then you trust whatever happens, be it good or bad. You're putting it into God's hands. And then when you do succeed at something, you can thank God for the gifts that He's given to you, the ability, the wherewithal, the opportunity. But it's all about God in the end. And that is how we are being humble. So I wanted to start a chapter, and that's just an example of what I did with all the chapters so that we could wrap our head around what is it we're talking about. And then we jump into some of the ideas of ways to live that fully.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, I thought as a reader that was so helpful, and especially that humility chapter that you mentioned. That was one of my favorites because I think that is so misunderstood, and you explained it so clearly. But I'd like to jump to something you say in chapter 1 that really stuck out to me. You said, if this book is nothing more than a collection of clever to-do lists, then it serves no purpose other than to keep you busy and out of trouble. So I'd love to know how you would recommend readers use the book so that it's serving a greater purpose.
Ultimately, this is about love, loving God, loving our neighbor, and loving ourselves. Like if you don't love yourself, you can't love your neighbors yourself because that's not going to go very well, right? And so this really isn't about, oh, look at all the things I did today. And sometimes people that don't understand the Catholic faith think that we're saved, that we think we're saved by our good works. But in reality, it's love that matters the most. And so these are opportunities to love others and to love God more. Like I used the example of watering a plant that somebody gave me. So I pray for that person each time I water the plant because they were so kind to give it to me. And so this isn't about, oh, I did this, I did that. It should be taking us, each act should take us closer to God and closer to the person that we're doing it for. And sometimes it's a matter of a spiritual exercise between us and God. It might be praising and thanking Him, thinking about things that we hadn't thought of before that we could thank Him for. But it's about deepening our faith, and the goal is to grow in holiness and get to heaven. And so that's what it's all about, not about checklists.
Yes, I love that. And it's, the way that you present it, I feel like we get these grandiose ideas in our heads of all the big things that we have to do to love and to get to heaven. And you're just boiling it down to the everyday, which is the real path to get there. So I'm so glad you did that. And I'd love to know how you developed these different holy hacks. Did you primarily rely on experiences in your own life, or did you look to other resources, to other people? Where did these all come from?
Well, first and foremost, they came from the Holy Spirit. Whenever I write a book, I really put myself in God's hands. And this started out just as an article. And I was inspired. And sometimes when you're inspired, and I've talked to a lot of people, especially artists, who just feel that it's coming from the outside and they're receiving it. And so as I was putting this down, taking notes, and wrote it into an article, it really went viral. It was very, very popular article on Holy Hacks. So then a publisher came to me, Ave Maria Press, and wanted to know if I could write a book on this. And it was easy for me to think about all the ways, like I talked about earlier, what are all the different ways that we need to grow in holiness? So, I looked at even people in my life. I mentioned my father at the beginning of the book. Very humble man. He's almost 97, if you can believe that. And I grew up watching him be a quiet example because he was the quietest one in the room, but everybody always loved him. But he did things for God. He always sought to do the right thing. He looked out for other people. And so I saw that as my starting point of how, I noticed he was maybe 92 or 93 at the time, and he knelt all the way down, when he genuflected at church. And I thought, it's the little things that make a difference sometimes and that you notice, because he didn't have a megaphone. He didn't say, oh, I believe this, that, or the other thing. He just quietly lived his faith. And so I thought of that the same with the saints. I looked at all those examples, people that I admired around me, on my chapter on gossip. Who are the people that you admire? Not the gossips, but the ones that speak kindly of other people. And I thought that was my starting point there, to help people wrap their minds around, I don't want to gossip. I want to live a virtuous, kind, charitable life. And so those are the kind of things when you really are living your own faith intentionally, you look around you and you look for those examples of inspiration.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I feel like that gives us such a goal to reach toward, because everyone wants to be the person who someone can look to and gain that inspiration and think, I could do that. So it's so much easier to do that in the small ways than coming up with these big, grandiose acts. Well, Patti, thank you so much for being with us. It's been great talking with you so far, and I look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you, Claire. I'm going to read just a little bit from the chapter on Holy Hacks for Humility. And as I've mentioned, it's one of my favorite chapters because you don't get to heaven without being humble. So I'm going to read just sections from it. The world does not value or understand the power of humility, but we do, because it was what Jesus used to save us. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as ransom for many. The more we empty ourselves of self, the more room we have for God. His plan for us is bigger than ours, so we should let go and let God to reach our full potential. Our achievements should be opportunities not for pride, but for thanksgiving. What we are is God's gift to us. What we do with it is our gift to him. And have you noticed that humble people are usually happy and well-liked? I'm not talking about equating humility with self-esteem being poor, but rather about those who are accomplished and do for others but do not make a show of it. Humility seems to contradict leadership, and yet there is no stronger leader than Jesus. Still, he was meek and humble of heart. Matthew 11:29. He emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming in human likeness, and found human in appearance. He humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. The Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us that humility is our starting point for prayer and receiving what God has to give us. Prayer is the raising of one's mind and heart to God, or the requesting of good things from God. But when we pray, do we speak from the height of pride and will, or out of the depths of our humble and contrite heart? He who humbles himself will be exalted. Humility is the foundation of prayer. Only when we humbly acknowledge that we do not know how to pray as we ought, are we ready to receive freely the gift of prayer. Pride is one of the 7 deadly sins and one behind the very first rebellion against God. Rather than be humbled and serve the Almighty, Lucifer opted out of heaven. A St. Augustine is thought to have said, "It is pride that changed angels into devils. It is humility that made men as angels." I have a fun memory from my childhood. My dad wanted to inspire us to have good vocabularies. So he used to have us pick out one vocabulary word a day that would be new to us, and then we would all share it. So it was like a fun event. There were 6 kids in my family, and probably about the 4 oldest ones were old enough to do this at the time. And we had so much fun that I used to go even further than that, and I used to come up with other words that nobody knew. And I would have fun putting them into my sentences while I was talking with people. It was like I knew a foreign language. And I was actually in about 6th grade at that time. And I would do it with my friends. And they'd be like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And I'd say, oh, you're just going to have to find out. So that power of the language and understanding words, I actually passed on to my friends, because then they would look up the words and everybody knew. And we were just doing it for fun, that I was going to be dropping these vocabulary words into my regular language that nobody would understand. So they'd have to go look it up. What's funny is I just go on inspiration to begin with. And I know it depends on the kind of writing you do. If there's a certain topic that you're covering, like I just did a book, What Would Monica Do? I needed to research St. Monica. But on this one, it was about living and life experiences. So I began with my inspiration. And then as I wrote, I knew that there had to be more research. So if I mention a saint, or if I mentioned what are the 7 virtues, that I started looking things up, or scripture passages. So the research kind of went alongside the inspiration in this case. I have 2 very favorite Catholic books. Of course, it's hard. You ask a Catholic that who likes reading, and it's going to take a while to decide, okay, what are my favorite ones? So I do have 2 that really, really are my favorites, and I'm going to read them so I don't get the title wrong. Trustful Surrender to Divine Providence, The Secret of Peace and Happiness. And that was written by Father Jean-Baptiste St. June. And then my other favorite one is The Shadow of His Wings, The True Story of Father Garan Goldman. And it was written by Father Goldman. And it's just both of those. One is deep inspiration on understanding divine providence and just accepting what God gives you day by day. And the other one was the story of this priest who was in the Nazi Germany. He was a seminarian. He became a priest. And his story is so mind-boggling, amazing. When I've given that book to other people, it becomes their favorite book. So I highly recommend both those books. Well, I like to write in story form whenever possible, because it pulls the reader in. I have a lot of experience with magazine and newspaper writing, and I used to write for Woman's World magazine, and they taught me to pare down a lot of the words and pull people in with emotions and actions. And even though I've written a couple children's books where you're thinking about fiction and you want to do that same thing, in regular writing, you want to do that too. You really want to pull the reader in and make it exciting, and to get rid of the unnecessary words that slow you down. So my goal is really to make it almost like a story form. And whenever you want to make a point, if you have a story to go with it, that is a way to engage people and pull them in, because we all love stories. The surprising thing for me is how closely God walks with me, because you can believe something in your head, but when you experience it, when coincidences happen, when you're searching for something and there, all of a sudden that information, somebody brings it to you or you stumble upon it. I realized that I gave my gift of writing back to God, because I used to write in the secular world. And once I said, God, you gave me this gift, I'm going to give it back to you. Boy, oh boy, he took it immediately. I used to write for Woman's World magazine about all kinds of things, but all of a sudden the only stories I got assigned were spiritual ones, where people prayed, where God was like a little piece of it somewhere. And so it surprises me how present he is, and how when we give him our gifts, he will take them and multiply them and magnify them, so that as a mother of 10 kids, we homeschooled for many years. And then my kids went to the Catholic high school. And so a lot of people would go, oh, she's got a master's degree and she sat home and is doing nothing with it. But in reality, I believe that I've had 15 published books. I believe that God multiplied my efforts, and He is the one behind whatever successes I've experienced. I think if I tried to be successful in the world, maybe I wouldn't have even had one book. But when you create and you accept it as a gift from God and you give it back to Him, boy, He's going to really surprise you so many times.
Well, Patti, thank you again for joining us. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, Claire, this has been a blessing. Thank you so much for having me on.
What I loved about Patti Armstrong's Holy Hacks is that it's very practical. So not a day goes by when we don't have an opportunity to exercise virtue, to grow in holiness, to come closer to Jesus Christ. And that's what she gives us ideas for. She's got all kinds of things packed into that book that we can just tap into on a daily basis. And that's where I think the strength of her work in this book is. It's a delight to realize that if you're just walking down the street and, you see a neighbor coming the other direction, there's something you can do to grow in holiness just by reaching out to that neighbor and saying hello, or just even a smile. And those things, those little things, are what make the difference as we follow Jesus. As we become more like Him, we become holy in those moments every day, not in the big things necessarily, but in the little things that present themselves as opportunities to us on a daily basis. And so, we might wonder, how am I ever going to be holy? But Patti Armstrong tells us that we always have the opportunity to become holy, that there's a moment by moment growth in holiness that can happen for us every day. And that's the power of this book. It opens up a perspective for us where we begin to see those things, those opportunities, those occasions for practicing virtue. And I know for me, I like to see, how can I practice the virtues I'm not very good at? How can I be more gentle today? Or how can I be more patient today? And that this book is just packed with ideas. And some of them take a little bit more preparation. And so you can set those as sort of goals. Those can be some of the bigger things. But there are daily small things that we can do. And she just unpacks life that way. And it teaches us to do the same so that we can see those opportunities, those chances, those moments of grace that are always there every day and every moment and in every aspect of our lives. So that's what I really love about this book. If you don't like praying the rosary, well, there's something else. If you don't like meeting somebody new, well, then there's something else. There's something that leverages your strengths in a way that helps you grow in holiness. And that's a powerful thing. That's a powerful reality.
Thank you for joining us for Booked on Shalom World TV. We'll see you again next week for another episode. Until then, happy reading.
My life is a miracle. Every child has a story of God's love to share. Shalom World, tune into God's love story.